George, as you know, we've gotten a ton of emails at the Case Breakers with all different types of requests and inquiries and people that want to volunteer with us. But what we've gotten a lot of is people are interested to know what other cases we're working on that aren't as high profile as, say, Zodiac. And so I thought you and I could get together today and discuss, maybe start with the case that brought you and I together as an investigative team and talk about the murder of Rebekah Gould.
Yep. That's a good case
So
to
this is
talk
the case.
about.
Yeah, that's the one that, like we said, this is how you and I met and how we basically became an investigative team. So I thought we could give viewers some background on her case and talk about how you got intertwined in her case and then how it brought the two of us together. So I'll just give a quick overview of the case, which is that Rebekah was killed in Melbourne, Arkansas in 2004. And so why don't you tell us or tell the viewers how you became linked to Rebekah's case and how you got involved in it, George?
It started with a phone call. I was just freshly out of college. My plan had been to become a lawyer, go to law school and be a lawyer. But my senior year in college, I met a lot of really miserable and poor lawyers. And I kind of made a decision at that point. I was like, I could be miserable or I could be poor, but I couldn't be both. And so I decided to pause, take a step back. So I took a job at a local newspaper. And it was just a typical Wednesday. It was in late September. I was sitting at my desk, phone rang, and a lady said that her 22-year-old niece was missing. And I lived in a very rural town, small town America. Things like that didn't happen. So the town she had disappeared from, the one you mentioned, Melbourne, was about a 20 or so minute drive from my office. So I drove down there that morning, got to the Izard County Sheriff's Department. There were a lot of people out in the parking lot. And of course, I was upset because I had asked the sheriff a couple days before. I made the rounds every week with the local police departments in the various counties and communities in that area. And I talked to him, and he hadn't said anything about a missing woman. And, this was Monday, September 20th, when I called him. And so he wasn't probably aware then that she was missing, but he was definitely aware the next morning on Tuesday that she was missing. So he had at a minimum gone 24 hours out notifying the public that a 22-year-old college student was missing, which I thought was egregious. So I confronted him and had some choice words for him. And I personally liked the sheriff a lot. We got along well. In fact, his brother was a sheriff in another county not too far from there. And I got along with both of them very, very well through the years. Anyway, so I confronted him, told him what I thought about the whole thing. And then I encountered Rebekah's family. She had several sisters who were out there. Her mother was out there. Her father, Dr. Larry Gould, was out there. Her mother handed me a poster, and a missing poster. And I was in my truck. I didn't even grab a notebook. So I actually had to take the missing poster, flip it over, and start taking notes. I can't remember exactly what I put the poster on, like the side of a wall, like out in the parking lot. It's the sheriff's department, or how I did it. But I started taking notes. In fact, I still have those notes. Right here. And I don't know how well you can see them.
Yeah, that's
But those are
incredible. You've kept that all these years.
those are the contemporaneous notes. And then this is the missing poster. So interesting to me that some of the notes on there years and years later, how they came into play. It's funny how right there at the moment, the onion starts to unravel even right there. So I started talking to Dr. Larry Gould a lot, her dad, and they were searching areas around Melbourne. Melbourne is the county seat of Izard County, Arkansas. It's kind of in the north central part of the state. It's in the Ozark Hills. Lots of little communities, lots of little hamlets. And so they just started looking for her. Now, what had happened is she was staying at a friend's house, a guy named Casey McCullough, that weekend. And she was a college student in Northwest Arkansas. And so what was supposed to happen was she was supposed to drop Casey off at work on a Monday morning. She went back to his house to collect her things. And then she was supposed to pick her sister Danielle up. And then once she got done picking her up, they were going to make their way back to Northwest Arkansas, which was about a 4-hour-ish drive for them through the hills. Well, she never arrived to pick up her sister. The Casey McCullough was at work allegedly, and then he went out with friends that night, and then he didn't end up going home that night. He ended up staying at another friend's house. So then the next morning, he goes back to his house. There's bloody sheets in the washing machine. The bed's been flipped. The pillows are hidden. Her car's there. Her keys are there. Her Pomeranian dog is there. Her money is there. Her cell phone, all that stuff is there, but she's gone, and there's blood in the house. Well, he goes to work, and sometime that morning, we think it's her mother actually finally got a hold of the sheriff department in Izard County and asked them to do a welfare check. Well, the police officer goes to Casey's work and picks him up, or he follows him in his vehicle. They go to the house. They find all this stuff. So immediately, once they find the bloody sheets in the washing machine, they know that they're dealing probably with a homicide situation. So I know that some of these details when I was on the ground that day were kind of known at that point. And so the family was being hopeful for sure, but they kind of knew the reality. And so I followed them around as they were searching for her, literally going through fields and driving down roads and gravel roads and all this other stuff. I actually watched her dad tape one of those missing posters that looked like the one I just had to one of those guide arrows that goes around a curve. And of course, what he was doing was illegal. You know, you can't obstruct signs like that. I came to the horrifying realization that he was trying to do literally anything to occupy his mind because he couldn't find her. Well, to make a long story short, we spent roughly 5 days every day looking for her, you know, pretty much in and around the Melbourne area. Well, the sheriff had a hunch, actually found out later that he actually got a call from a lady who said that there was an odd smell near her home and there were buzzards that were circling in an unusual pattern and near her house. And it was roughly 5 miles outside of Melbourne, in between Melbourne and a little town called Mountain View, which was actually Rebekah's hometown. It's a pretty desolate road. It is a major highway. It's the highway that connects the two towns, but it's still very desolate. It's the kind of road that they mow the sides maybe once a year if you're lucky. Very curvy, very remote. And so near a place called Devil's Den, they found Rebekah's body about 35 feet down an embankment.
Back in 2004, the pull-off only went to where you see this pavement end, and then the gravel area was dirt and grass. So the pull-off there wasn't a lot of space to pull off the road, but there's obviously enough for one car. It's really quiet here aside from the birds. You can easily hear a car coming from at least a quarter mile away, I'd say. And so to this east side off the road, somewhere down that embankment, is where Rebekah's body was found. It's really overgrown with black locust and other shrubs and grass and brush now, but back in 2004 it was much more open. It's so overgrown, there's not even a view anymore from this overlook. It's not maintained now, but looking at imagery from 2004, it looked like it was pretty easily passable in a vehicle. And back then you could have driven right down here to the bottom of the embankment, backed a vehicle in right here, and unloaded her body.
She was partially clothed. She was wearing a t-shirt, her panties. She was very decomposed. It was a really sad situation. I was out there that morning, pretty much right around the time she was found. They were still putting up tape and whatnot. And I thought that was horrifying. It was the first time I'd been to funerals. I've had elderly, relatives and things like that who had passed away. So I'd been to some funerals at that point in my life, and those are obviously sad, but seeing something like this, a 22-year-old brutally murdered, like she was something different. And it was shocking to me. I won't lie. So I leave the scene and go back to the sheriff's department, because as the crow flies, the sheriff's department was only about 3 or 4 miles actually from where her body was found. And so I get to the parking lot. Her dad actually comes up to me because a rumor had been circulating. And you got to realize at this point, there are TV cameras there every day now from all the TV stations throughout the region, not just in Arkansas, where they had TV crews from Springfield, Missouri, Memphis, Tennessee. I mean, there was a bunch. It was a pretty big regional story when it happened. And so the parking lot's full of people. I see her dad. He comes up to me. He asked me if they found his daughter. And I told him, I said, Larry, you need to go and ask the sheriff. And he grabs me again. He goes, did they find my daughter? And I said, there's no other missing woman in this county. And so he collapsed. And I always remember that because it's such an odd thing, odd in the sense that I didn't know this guy. And the only reason we ever came together was because his daughter had been horrifically murdered and she had vanished. And so, some details emerged pretty quickly afterwards that she had died from blunt force trauma to the head, that there had been no signs of a direct sexual assault to her. Obviously, that doesn't mean there couldn't have been some other sexual component to the crime, because we all know that sometimes there's no evidence for it, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. And you and I have talked about this ad nauseum. There was a loose piano leg inside the house. Casey was a musician. He had a piano, and somebody hit her in the head with a piano leg, allegedly. We don't know. The piano leg was missing, and she did die from a blunt force trauma, and we've reenacted, how many hours, reenacting scenarios with that piano leg. And so, obviously there were a couple of suspects right off the bat. Casey, the sort of boyfriend that she was friends with, he was interviewed several times. He had to take polygraph tests. He was the story was he was at work, and, and that she was allegedly seen at a convenience store that morning after she dropped him off at work, and we kind of just thought that these details were accurate. We thought he had a solid alibi. And so that's why the police weren't pursuing him harder as a suspect. Now they started going after another guy who did have somewhat of a criminal record, who was known to Rebekah, known to some of the people in the case. His name was Chris. They went after him. They interviewed him. They accused him of it multiple times. But the problem is that there was no DNA. There was no forensics. There was, these guys had what seemed to be somewhat credible alibis. And so, we went from a month, 2 months, 6 months, a year, do an anniversary story. I moved on to other newspapers, and, now I've written about and I've been involved in dozens of murder cases. So, at the time, I didn't realize that some of the things that were going on in that case were not normal, like they weren't really updating the family much. There wasn't really anything new happening. They had the same detective working the case for years, and he had this theory of the case. And, I am as pro law enforcement as anybody in the world, but, I'm not pro bad policing at all. And,
Right.
his
Not
theory,
at all.
and his theory was just wrong, and he wouldn't come off that theory. And so the case never went anywhere. And so finally in 2016, I wrote my first book about the West Memphis 3 case. And it had been, 12, I think we mentioned this happened in 2004. So it had been 12 years. And so I wrote the foreword to the book. I wrote about her case. And the only reason I did it was because I wanted to bring awareness about this unsolved murder case. And I just thought it could be solved. It just seemed very easy to solve. It was in this guy's house. All of her stuff was there. There seemed to be some components to the case. Like, for instance, there were 2 dogs in the house and the dogs were uninjured. So the natural assumption would be that whoever came into the house to kill her would be known to the dogs at least, because one was, we believe, a mixed breed
Yeah.
pit bull, and the other one was a Pomeranian. And if you know anything about those types of dogs, they're not wallflowers. I mean, if someone new or someone
No.
unknown comes in the house, they're going to get, they're going to get riled up. And so I wrote the foreword, withheld a lot of details about it because at this point I'm still trying to be as helpful as I can to the police because I knew a lot of things. And the byproduct of that book was that I actually got to re-engage my relationship with Dr. Larry Gould. And so we started talking to at least one private investigator. We talked to some filmmakers. We talked to some people. We were just trying to figure out a game plan to get this case going again, like to get some public attention, because it's been my experience, Jennifer, that the best tool to use in a cold case when it comes to reigniting a case is media pressure. Get the story
Absolutely.
out again, get people talking, get those social media, get that thing going on social media where people are starting to get engaged again. And so that started to a degree. We did in the summer of 2016, we were able to ignite some of that stuff. Now, by 2017, though, once again, things had kind of fallen off again. And so I was in the midst of another book project. And this book project was an anthology style book, meaning that every chapter was just a different murder case that I'd written about. I think I've told you many times, I feel like people have shorter attention spans nowadays. And so
I agree.
writing the big, the big helter skelter type book, maybe at some point that might be a viable thing again. But right now, people just, they want to sit down and read a little bit and move on. Claim that they read a book when it's 150 pages or something. So I was writing a book like that. So I was like, okay, I talked to Dr. Gould and I said, hey, I'm going to write another chapter about this and update the case. And I did that. Well, not long after that, I got an email from a woman named Catherine Townsend. And Catherine was a reporter. She worked for, I believe, the Discovery Channel website. Like, she would write crime stories for them. And then she had an
Hmm.
idea for a podcast. Her sister had actually gone to school with Rebekah's sister Danielle. They'd gone to high school together, and so she knew the case. She knew the area. Her family lived in the Mountain View. There, I think her father had actually retired there and became a sheriff's deputy upon his retirement, and so it was just kind of perfect for her. I mean, she was living in between New York and LA at the time, but she came back to Arkansas, embedded, talked to me multiple times. We did a bunch of interviews. She interviewed everybody in the case. And so then she put together a podcast called Hell and Gone. And Hell and Gone, the podcast, was featured on Dr. Oz. It was featured on a bunch of different regional, local shows. A lot of newspapers wrote stories about it. And so when it launched in, I believe, October of 2018, the only way I can describe it is it started a furor, if that isn't too cliche. People got really riled up, and some of these Facebook pages that got formed, I mean, it would be 600 and 700 comments with people just getting bent out of shape mad. And also, some things started to percolate to the surface, like some of the things that we had assumed in this case. Turned out that some of these things might not have been as true as we thought. And so I give Catherine a lot of credit for reigniting this case in a way that, quite honestly, it may not have been reignited had she not done this podcast. So I give her a lot of credit for that. I participated in several episodes, and we talked about it a lot. And I think, Jennifer, you and I did 3 years ago at this time. We did not know each other, so
That's
uh,
correct. I know. It's amazing to reflect back on what has
yeah,
changed so
yeah.
drastically.
So I think, I
And
mean,
just one
and please,
thing, you said Catherine interviewed everybody, but there was one person who refused to be interviewed, right?
that's a very good point. There was one person who did refuse to be interviewed, and that would be Casey McCullough. And I can say
Hmm.
this because this truly happened to me. I interviewed him 9 months after the murder, and he told me that he never returned to the home that morning. He told me that with a straight face, told me that. But that turned out to be a lie. He did return that morning.
Yeah.
And he also had some weird story that he found out she was missing when he was at work that morning and then left to go find her, which is odd because he was at the house that
Yeah.
morning before he ever came to work. Her car keys were there, her car was there. Even there, and there could be an argument that maybe he didn't open up the washer to see the bloody sheets. Okay, maybe that's possible. Maybe he didn't notice his own mattress flipped over or the pillows missing, or maybe he didn't notice the blood that was on the baseboards or on the back porch. Maybe he didn't think it was odd that all of her stuff was there, including her cell phone and car keys, but she was not there. But he told me a story that he left work and he ran into the cop, and I'm sitting there going, well, this is only like a 3 or 4 mile trip from the work to your house, if that. You just ran into the cop? I was like, that doesn't make sense. Of course, we found out later that was not true. The police officer who was the responding officer said in a newspaper article, a newspaper interview, he said, I went to his work, then we went. So Casey refused to be interviewed. And of course, by refusing to be interviewed, it automatically cast a pall over his part in all this, like part of the story. So
And I just want to put out his reason for not wanting to be interviewed is because, quote, he has a family to protect. And that quote, we're going to examine in more detail later on because it's
yeah,
very,
he
very
has
telling, I think.
very, very telling.
So,
So Jennifer, just to get into it a little bit, you actually found out about Rebekah's case through the Helen Gone podcast, right?
that's correct. Yeah. My editor at work, who you now know, Leishan, you know her very
Mm-hmm.
well. She,
Yep.
uh, she was always kind of prompting me to write about more unsolved homicides or true crime. And she had emailed me about that podcast because she had binged it as soon as it came out and she thought I might be interested in it. And of course, obviously, she was correct. And so I binged it as well. And I remember hearing you on there, and it was very clear that you had been with this case literally since about day one and knew it very, very well. And so you were just the natural person for me to reach out to because, I had a lot of questions, but also some ideas about the behavioral aspects that I guess you could say were exhibited on behalf of Rebekah's killer, namely that her body was moved to a secondary location and somebody tried to clean up that crime scene, which is actually really rare in homicides. And so that stuck out to me immediately. And then, of course, the whole piano leg thing. I literally can't find another murder case where a piano leg was the murder weapon. Um, it doesn't mean that
Yeah.
doesn't exist, but that just tells you how rare it is as a weapon. And so that really stuck out to me too, because it just seems so unlikely and unnatural. But like you said, apparently this piano leg is missing from the house. And like you said, there's a reason that it's missing. So it very well may have been the weapon.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about unique case, this may be a unique case in that only that regard is that a piano leg was used. I
Sure.
think mostly because piano legs are like really like as far as like it's hard to acquire a piano leg because typically they're holding up a piano, and apparently this is like one of the few legs that wasn't. And of course, we've been told later, before Rebekah died, maybe a month before, that Casey actually pulled that piano leg off and showed Rebekah and her sister Danielle how easily that leg would come off. So, we could never definitively know unless the person who killed her tells us definitively what was used. What we know right now is the police say it's missing. And if it was the murder weapon, that's a big clue as to who committed the crime because you would have to know that piano leg
Sure.
would come off. Now, several other people besides Casey did know that it came off. And so I will say this at this point. You emailed me and I read the
This I
email
did.
and I would get periodic emails and I read it And the first thing I did as I looked at my wife, I said, I think somebody very serious is looking into the Rebekah Gould murder case now and they want to talk. And I think in that email, you'd asked me if it would be okay, we could just communicate like that, or if maybe we could chat sometime. And I was like, I think we could chat sometime. And we haven't stopped chatting for 3 years.
I know. I'll never forget that day because I didn't even expect a response, honestly. But I think I had given you my phone number because you called within like 15 minutes or something. It was pretty, short time period after I sent that email, and I don't get well, now I do, but at the time I didn't ever get a call from Arkansas, so it came up on my caller ID,
Right.
but I didn't know it was you, but it was from Arkansas. I'm like, oh wow, this must be George Jarrett, I guess. And sure enough, it was, and we literally talked for 3.5 hours straight.
We did. We did.
And
And we went through all the theories of the case, and it was
mhm,
it was an epic
yeah,
start. So I guess next week, I guess we're going to try to get into a little bit of what we
yeah,
uncovered, what
hmm,
some analysis that was done. We actually did some crowdsourcing in this case. We
hmm,
actually got the guy who's been charged with her murder to jump on a Facebook page and start chatting with us.
yeah. No, that's what we're going to get into on our next episode, and again talk about the meaning of those behavioral aspects and the actions that this killer took, and like you said, all the new things that we uncovered through our efforts to crowdsource and develop new sources and connections to the case. So stay tuned, everybody, and we're going to have a lot more coming for you on this case.